Welcome to the Love Lab Podcast, the place to be for honest and real talk about relationships and sex. Whether you're a man or woman, single or a couple, this is the show for you. I am your host, Kevin Anthony, and I am here to help you have the relationship of your dreams and the best sex of your life. All right, welcome back to the Love Lab Podcast. This is episode 369 today, and it is titled, Why It Matters to Know Who You Are as a Sexual Being. This is going to be a really great conversation. I've been looking forward to it for a while, and the title, I don't know if the title even really does it justice, honestly, but it was so hard to title this episode. Like, how do I explain what we're going to be talking about here? You hear me talk on this show a lot about how your sex and your sex life is not separate from the rest of your life. And unfortunately, in our society, we tend to really like separate that out and compartmentalize it. Like the sex stuff is this weird thing that you don't want to really talk about and that you only do behind the closed doors in the privacy of your home, but has nothing to do with the rest of, your life over there. And first of all, that's just complete nonsense. And I talk about it a lot on this show. I talk about how we have one animating life force energy, which is our sexual energy. And when we repress that, we're repressing basically our entire life in some way or another. When we free that up, right, we free up other parts of our life too. And so what we're going to be talking about today is basically why that's important. Why is it important for us to understand who we are as a sexual being? How important our sexuality is to us as a healthy and whole functioning human being. We're going to talk a little bit about where people go wrong and why. We're going to share some personal stories about, our own journeys. So it's going to be a fascinating conversation. So if the title, you were like, I don't know what we're talking about today, I hope that clears it up at least a little bit, and then keep listening because it'll make a whole lot more sense as we go along. Before we jump into that, though, a brief pause for my sponsors. Ladies, did you know that the overwhelming majority of men consider receiving oral sex a must in their relationships? Of course you did, because men have been asking you for it your entire life. But do you feel confident in your ability to give great oral sex? If you tend to avoid it because you don't feel like you are good at it, or if you feel that you are pretty good at it but want to get even better, then my new Blowjob Mastery course is for you. I have teamed up with the amazing coach Reed Duong of Eternal Love to bring you a practical and easy to follow course that is guaranteed to increase your confidence and skill when giving oral sex to your man. In this course, you will get all the secrets to mastering the art of oral sex with step-by-step instructions and multiple live demos. Go to sacredfemininearts.com/BJ Mastery. That's sacredfemininearts.com/BJ Mastery. I laugh every time I read this ad because I never in a million years thought I would make an online course about this particular topic. But the stars align, here it is, and we've been getting actually amazing feedback from it. I kind of knew this would be the case when the simple video on what men think is a good blowjob went viral. I realized by everybody's comments, mostly from the women, that they had no idea that that's what men thought was a good blowjob. I'm like, geez, if they don't know, somebody's got to help them out with that. So we created that course, sacredfemininearts.com/BJ Mastery. And of course, Power Mastery 3.0, which is the latest version of the men's popular sexual mastery course. If you are struggling with erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, or simply want to increase your skills in the bedroom, then Power and Mastery is for you. Join the exclusive club of men who have taken their sexual performance into their own hands and become sexual masters. Mastering your sexuality is a key component to becoming the man she has always dreamt of and craves. Don't leave your sexual performance up to chance or the throw of the dice. Become a sexual master today by going to powerandmastery.com/sexual-mastery. That is powerandmastery.com/sexual-mastery. That is the sexual mastery course that Selena and I created together, that I revised after her passing, but still has so much of her amazing content and is still helping people today. It's really awesome. Check that out. So we got something for the men, something for the women. Okay. Now that we're mostly done paying for the show, let's get to why you are all here. With over 2 decades of experience supporting people to discover their own sexual agency, Dr. Juliana Hauser leads conversations about taboo topics like sex and sexuality, menopause, intimacy, relationships, and more with approachability and expertise. She has a PhD in counseling education, has a thriving virtual practice, is a beloved media personality on screen, on stage, and in print, and is a TEDx speaker. Dr. J is also the creator of the Holistic Sexuality courses, including Revealed, and is the author of A New Position on Sex, a guide to greater sexual confidence, pleasure, and authenticity, which is coming out. It says here September 2025, but now is September 2025 as we are recording this. So we're going to talk about that throughout the course of this show today. But welcome, Dr. J, to the show.
It's so good to be here.
All right. You say that discovering who you are as a sexual being is the last frontier in self-development. Can you please tell the audience, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, it's a statement, right? I mean, it either lands or it's like, huh? Like what do you mean? And so how I look at it is our who we are as sexual beings has been misunderstood for so long that we, similar to how you said in the description of what we're going to be talking about, it's just been bifurcated from our who we are. Like who we are as a sexual being is different than who we are in general. And as my work as a therapist collided with who I am as a sex educator, and also when I did acting, I did some acting in LA. It came to me really in a very obvious way that they're actually quite intertwined, if not the exact same thing. And so knowing who you are as a sexual being is a pathway of knowing who you are in general, and as well as an expression of who you are. It's the essence and the core of us.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's basically another way of saying what I was sharing in the intro, which is these things are not separate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who we are as a sexual being is a critical component to who we are as a being. And for far too long, we have completely separated them and pretended that they were two different things.
Mm-hmm.
And that does a disservice to humanity, in my opinion.
Mine too.
And so so there's that, and then there's the idea that it's kind of the last frontier,
Yeah.
right? So let's
Yeah.
just talk about that for a little bit, because I don't know, it was maybe the 80s ish or so. I think you and I are probably roughly about the same age, but I think it was around the 80s or so when like self-help started really becoming a thing, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And it has really grown now, and it's this huge, multi-billion-dollar industry of self-help. But one of the things I've noticed over a lot of those years, and it's honestly the reason why I have a career at this point, but what I've noticed is it's been left out yet again. The idea of, developing who we are as a sexual being and coming into a healthy relationship with our sexuality. And so from my perspective, that's why I see this as the last frontier. It's like we've had decades since the 80s. I've seen self-help around every aspect you can possibly think of. And yet the big pink elephant in the room is we're still not really talking about sexuality.
And we don't know how to talk about it. Yeah. Yes. It is. It's shocking and not shocking to me that as much public speaking that I do, and I speak at a lot of conferences and a lot of meetings, that I will be the only person speaking about sexuality. Or I'm invited to speak and I'm asked not to talk about sexuality. I talk about the other work that I do, and like, please don't go there. And I see in this, amazing wellness space that has all these experts and these amazing topics, sex is left out of it. And it's baffling to me that we don't position sexuality in a sense of normalcy, a sense of necessity, and yet we have a media culture. It's sex is everywhere. It's used to sell the most unrelated things, and we position sex to be like the litmus test of how your relationship is doing. We know the statistic that they say sex and finances are what breaks up relationships more than anything. We say it's so important in so many ways, and then we do nothing to support the importance. We don't properly sex educate. We don't talk about it. We don't put it even in our adulthood, even when it's more sanctioned, quote sanctioned. We don't offer it, and then we think people should be just healthy and happy and know what we're talking about. And of course, that's not how it works.
Yeah, and that is honestly why a big reason why I keep doing what I do here on this podcast and with my work, because you and I were talking right before we hit record here about the challenges of being in this industry and how we are constantly censored. And it's difficult to be in this industry to try to get this message out. But because it is such an important part of what it means to be a whole functioning human, somebody's got to do it. Like there
Yeah.
have to be voices out there talking about what it means to have a healthy relationship to sexuality. And like
Mhm.
you said, it's used in so many unhealthy ways in our society, right? That we need voices to overpower that. We need to be louder and more prevalent than the voices that are using sex in a way that's negative. So I agree with you. It's just so important that we have conversations around what does it mean to be in right relation or healthy relationship to your sexuality. One, just yourself as an individual, which is the next question I want to ask you. And then also, how do we do that with a partner? Right.
Yeah.
So that leads me to the next question is, what does it mean to know who you are as a sexual being? Like if I'm listening to this and I'm like, okay, I'm curious, who am I as a sex? Like, what does that even mean? What am I looking for? What am I trying to figure out here?
Yeah. And it's one of the few places where I think we do start with like, what? Like, what do you mean? If we were to put it in different contexts, we'd at least have some guesses. But absolutely, and in my 20 years of speaking about this and learning and asking questions, that question has never had an easy answer, just despite where we are culturally, which says a whole lot. But so who are you as a sexual being? I what that means to me is that you one understand the thing that we were talking about to begin with, which is that your sexuality is not separate from who you are. That's the first thing. You see it holistically. And the second thing is that you see how we are misinformed about what the definition of sexuality is, and or perhaps a more accurate way of saying it is that we are only given a slice of what sexuality is. And when you're exposed to a much deeper, broader definition of sexuality, like a holistic sexuality, then you're like, oh, well, I didn't know you're talking about sexuality when you're talking about that. Like, oh, okay, I get that a little bit more. But I thought when we say sexuality, we're talking about who you're doing, like what you're doing with your body, and with whom are you doing it, and that's where it starts and that's where it ends. And when I was exposed to the concept of it being so much more than that, it was the light bulb moment for me. And I kind of to go back on the question that you asked previously, which is why is it the last frontier? It's one of the last frontiers of, or it is the last frontier of self-development, because we don't know enough about how to look at it holistically, and because we are misinformed and miseducated and don't have a lot of safe places to talk about it. We don't have the skill set to do it. We don't have the words, we don't have the practice, we don't have the modeling of it. And we have a culture that says that there's a right kind of sexuality and there's a wrong kind of sexuality. And that it takes a lot of bravery to then say, okay, well, maybe not. Maybe that doesn't work for me. Or life forces you through something pretty hard that you don't have a choice but to examine who you are as a sexual being. And that's often where I meet people. And so when I meet people in places where they've been harmed or they've experienced negative consequences from who they are as a sexual being, then we start with that. So let's unwind, let's untangle with what culture has told you the definition is, and who you are, as well as your experiences. And let's talk about what that means to you. And often the answer is pretty short. It's a lot of I don't knows. I'm sure it's a place that where you feel really familiar as well, which is I embrace the I don't knows. I think it's a beautiful beginning, not a place that we have to stay in the grieving. But oftentimes, the first response is a grieving response of I don't know, or I'm afraid to answer.
Yeah, I think you did a good job of answering that question. It can be tricky, and yet it doesn't necessarily have to be. And what you shared was the first thing is understanding that it's not separate, right? Your sexuality is a key component of the whole you, right? And then the other piece being once you realize that and you want to put some focus on understanding that part better, since most people haven't, then it's unlearning what you've been told and figuring out what's true for you. Right? And I think, which is exactly what you said, I'm just sort of distilling it down a little simpler. But to me, that's sort of the essence of what it means to know who you are as a sexual being. It's like, I realize I am a sexual being. I realize that this is an important part of me being a whole human being. And then I go, okay, so a lot of my beliefs around that have been given to me from people who did not necessarily have my best interest in mind. So what stuff is theirs? And then what stuff is mine? And then, as you just pointed out, inevitably, when people go through that process, they realize, I don't know what stuff is mine because I've never taken the time to figure it out. Right. And so that's that sort of uneasy place that you were just talking about of the I don't know. But here's the beautiful thing about the I don't know. You now have an opportunity to figure it out for yourself. And that's where some of the fun comes in. You get to experiment. You get to ask yourself questions. You get to try new things, right? And the beauty of that, and this is true of any self-help, it doesn't matter what it is. People go through this exact same process with, say, spirituality and religion, which has been a huge focus of self-help for a long time. At some point, they realize my whole life, I have believed X system or belief system because that's what was given to me. And I was told this, and this about it. And then they go, is that really true? Because I see there's this and this and this over here. They go on this journey of exploring it all till they come back to a place where they find what feels true for them. And I think it's the same thing here with sexuality. So that place of feeling uneasy about the I don't know shouldn't necessarily feel uneasy. Or maybe I should put it this way. It's okay if it feels uneasy because then you get the opportunity to go on what could be a fun and life-changing journey.
I love how you put that together, and I would say what I see next is what are my options? Like so I don't know. It's like what do I choose from? Which again is a pretty exciting place. I love it when I get a version of that question. And then invariably, what I see intertwined between that is the knowing, which is I do think most people, if they're going to step into to this topic, most people have an inherent knowing that who you are as a sexual being reflects a lot of who you are. And there's a lot of fear of what that means. And so after you get it and you say, I don't know, what are my options? A lot of people are like, ooh, what are we going to uncover about me? And what does that mean? Or like, what are you going to think? And what am I going to think of what I uncover? So a lot of people will stop there, which is like, ooh, this feels like I'm opening up a Pandora's box, and I'm gonna go back to prioritizing grocery shopping and my exercise regime instead of who I am sexually, because we if you are uncomfortable with any part of your sexuality that has popped up, which most people have places of being uncomfortable because of the rules that other people have put onto sexuality. There's quite a fear of being different, not being normal, your interests being uncommon or your experiences being terrible or different than other people. Then it takes a lot of bravery to keep going in that place. And what I know you and I have both seen is when you can get through that part of the examination and and reside in the fun of curiosity, then you are about to experience the most incredible transformation. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I feel in some ways that my journey is unlikely to have resulted in where I am. I started off as a kindergarten teacher. That was my first job, and here I am as somebody who speaks about sex and sexuality all over the world, and yet I am the exact person who should be doing this and talking about it too, because everyone can be an expert in who they are, and have the responsibility of knowing who they are sexually.
Yes. So I had another question I was going to ask you, and it has just completely left my brain in this moment. So we'll just move on to the one I had after that, which is because that one was not written down. It was just something that popped into my head as I was listening to you speak, and then I lost it. Sometimes that happens.
I get it. Yes.
Um, the second question, actually, I think it's the third one, is probably going to be the most difficult question I ask you throughout this
Mm.
entire show. So I hope you're ready for
And
it.
hit me with it.
We're talking about this idea of, discovering yourself as, a sexual being. And one of the things that I love to do on this show is kind of lead by example. So I'm wondering, how would you describe yourself today as a sexual being?
Mm. Hmm. I would say it's great, and I'm not even sure I've ever been asked that. And I get asked a lot of questions. So, how would I describe myself? I would say I am open to new discoveries all the time. I love finding edges, and I love experiencing myself as I approach an edge, and I get to know parts of myself and how I negotiate with myself or around somebody else, what those edges are. I am, as a sexual being, I'm somebody who feels a lot of comfort in the process of asking myself questions and sitting in the response of it. And and I know that may in some ways sound vague, but it's the constancy. It's where it doesn't matter what the topic or the context is. It's frequently where I show up, which is I like being challenged. I like finding new places and in the specifics of who I am in like sex acts or in even sensuality, the things that are a bit more on the nose when we're talking about holistic sexuality as opposed to some of the other places that may feel more adjacent. I when I am exposed to so much of other people's sexual lives and I hear so many other opinions and I hear so many experiences, I know that I I have a desensitization to a lot of things because not a lot of things are new to me now, but I'm desensitized in a way of exposure, but I still find new places for me to explore in the way that I express that in my own private life. And I find that difference to be pretty interesting, and a lot of fun.
All right. Good job. Good job. That was a difficult question. And I'm not surprised that nobody's really asked you that before. But, again, the point is like, we're telling people here that it's important for you to understand who you are as a sexual being. And so, I thought it would be cool for two people, because I'll give my
Yeah, I want
take
to
on
hear your
myself
answer.
too. Yeah. Two people who've been on this journey for a long time and what we've kind of figured out thus far. So for myself, I would say that as a sexual being, I've always been curious. I have always been the type of person who was like, well, I know that's what they say, but is that really true? And I do that in every aspect of my life. Uh, so that has left me in a position of experimenting a lot. So I've tried a lot of different things. I figured out what I like and what I don't like through that experimentation. Because now I know what I like and what I don't like and what I want and what I don't want, I'm far more confident in my sexuality. It's also helped me remove a lot of shame that was there. So, I don't know. I mean, I can't say there's zero shame and I'm 100% because, absolutes are a little difficult, but like I feel like I'm in a place in my life now where nothing really phases me. I don't get weirded out about stuff. I can show up. I was invited to a party not too long ago, and I've been to a lot of sex parties, but they've generally been what we consider like conscious sex parties. And I got invited to one by somebody I'd only met once before. It was a friend of my partner. And it was way more on the swinger side than I'm used to. But because I am confident in who I am as a sexual being, and I know what I like and what I don't like, what I want, what I don't want, I can speak up about it. I can set boundaries. I was not at all fazed by it. And I went to it. And there was a lot of stuff happening that I didn't want any part of, but that was perfectly okay. Right. And so that has been a big part of my journey in coming into what I would consider a healthy relationship with sexuality. And it's what allows me to do what I do here on this show and with clients and with making courses and things like that. Like I don't have that weirdness around sexuality that most people do. I do a video on what men think is a good blowjob, a video I wrote in like 5 minutes. I just sat down and I go, what do I think is a really good blowjob? Like, what do my guy friends talk about? I wrote a list, I made a video, I threw it out there. It's got like a 500,000 views at this point, right? I don't even know how many comments. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. I guess people want to know about this. Let's make a course about it, right? Like not too many people could really do that, but that only comes from having done this work and this journey, which leads me to my next question. I know we talked a little bit in the pre-interview about your journey. I'm wondering if you could tell the listeners a little bit about your story, your journey, because like you said, you were a kindergarten teacher, right? And now you're doing something completely different and you're in a completely different space as far as your relationship to your sexuality. Tell us a little bit about that journey. How did you get here where you are?
Yeah. And I would say too, I think like sitting or standing in front of 25-year-old kindergartners is scarier than standing up and talking about sex in some ways too. Quite an edge there. Although I loved it. So I would say my story really begins with the context of my family that I was born into. That my dad was a radiologist, my mom was an ER nurse, and so they saw the worst of everything and the worst case scenario of everything, and that absolutely spilled forward to who we were as sexual beings and in our sex education. It was a lot of do not do this or this will happen. And that was mixed with it. I came into the world, as you said, like a very curious person. My sister used to have an older sister. She used to cry and say, make her put her clothes on. And I was like running around as a 5-year-old naked. And I didn't understand what was different about that. Or I was described as precocious because I was always asking questions and it never made sense why was this topic so different to ask about when I was seeing it everywhere or whatever my young version, my brain could see it. And yet I had this parallel experience happening that I was a people pleaser. I wanted to be a good girl. I wanted to not be in trouble. I wanted to be wanted and I didn't know how to combine all of those various things, and I didn't have an outlet to go to either. I'm 53, and the internet wasn't in existence, and there wasn't a lot of ways unless you had like somebody who had like a hustler in their bathroom from their dad, or luckily for me I had a friend that I call like my sexual Sherpa, and she and I asked each other questions. I mean, I'd love to hear some of our conversation now. I'm sure the conversations were like horrifying to hear what we were acting like we knew. But it was really my first experience of we were equally curious, but she was doing it and I wasn't. And so I got to hear what her experience was from the things that we were wondering about. And she didn't shame me for not doing it, and I didn't shame her for doing it. We really got to have our own agency in that process. And that really carried through a lot of my life through college and in my first marriage. And I after my master's degree, I went to LA and acted for a while, and I had this acting coach who um, was like in acting, like you don't say no. So if you say no, like that means you aren't brave, and you can't get the role. And she in this one acting class asked us what would be a scene that would be the worst thing to have to do. And I was one of the first people to go, and I said a seduction scene. And the next people, like the next person looked at me and was like, murdering a child or incest, and all the other options were very terrible and obvious, but it wasn't for me. It was absolutely truthful that if I had to have, if I had to seduce somebody, it would be the one scene I dreaded. I could absolutely get into the other ones. And so I knew as soon as I heard like the third person go, I was like, oh my gosh, she is going to make me do this. And so she did. And she's like, I want you to seduce Price. And I knew I was going to be terrible. And I was absolutely terrible. And she said, what do you think, Price? And he's like, oof, like that was not good. And I was shrinking as I walked back to like the circle. And she asked another woman to do it. And she's like, well, how was that, Price? And he could barely speak. Like she had done an incredible job of it. And she looked at me and she's like, whatever that was, fix that shit, Juliana. You got to fix it. And I remember thinking, what is it that I have to fix? And how do I fix it? And that's really honestly where I had the combination of like who we are as sexual beings is who we are. But I didn't have that wording yet. What I felt was I thought I knew who I was, but I was really just performing. I didn't really know the truth of who I was because everything that you described as who you were as a sexual being was the exact opposite of who I was. I did not know my boundaries. I did not know how to have the words to say yes or no. I didn't I thought performing sexually was what you're supposed to do. And I didn't know there was another option until I met someone that I dated for 5 years, and he was the first person that stopped and said, "But what do you want?" And my answers felt so immature and I was 30 and I didn't have an answer that was interesting at all to him. And I didn't love that. And he was very sexually experienced and he's like, no, we don't move forward until you know what your yes, basically he didn't say those words, but basically he was like, you need to know, or we're not going to do this. And he was very patient in finding that out with me and letting me have my own space. And when I started doing that and discovered on my own, I was like, oh, this is so much better. This really is different when I'm authentically asking myself, which was the biggest problem, was that I never stopped and asked myself, do you want to be doing this? And what do you like? It wasn't, the problem didn't start with somebody else. It started with me.
Isn't that true of pretty much all of our problems?
Yes, true. Yeah. And that goes back to your original question, which is when you know who you are as a sexual being, it changes everything because that skill began for me in sexuality. And it was really the only place that it could have woken me up like that. I had done a lot of self development. I was already a practicing therapist, but it hadn't landed in such a core way as it had with my sexuality because I had I had really kept it at a surface level. And when someone said fix that, and I asked myself fix what, I took the onion layers down to a much deeper level. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once I realized what was missing in me, I just couldn't accept less. And I'm grateful for him for saying that to me and staying the course.
What's really interesting about that, especially the last part of that story, was when he said fix that, your response was fix what? And I think that is where a lot of people are at. It's that idea of you don't know what you don't know. You don't even know that you don't know something. So when somebody tells you to fix it, you're like, fix what? Like, I don't even understand this, what it is you're talking about. Right. So I
Yes.
think conversations like this have the potential to help people answer that question of what. The thing that I kind of spaced out on earlier was this idea that you were talking about, um, experimenting and like figuring out what it is, getting ideas and trying things. And I was like, there's now 369 episodes of this podcast. If you want to know what is possible in the realm of sexuality, just go listen to all those episodes. I talk about everything you can think of. That at least will pique your
Can't think
curiosity.
of, right. I can't think
You
of.
know, I met with somebody who is now a new client of mine, a new coaching client of mine. And one of the things she told me when we had our initial strategy call was, she said, I've listened to every episode of your podcast. There was 360 something at the time, right? And it just blew me away. And I was like, that is amazing. First of all, thank you. Thank you
Yes.
for listening to all of those. But that, to me, that is somebody who's in this inquiry. That is somebody who wants to know, who is open to figuring out what it is they don't know and trying different things. And so that's just one example of that.
Oh,
So if you get to that place where you're like, fix what? Listen to those episodes. If you have strong negative reactions to any of them, that's the what.
exactly. And again, it's so brave. I wish it wasn't something that you had to have bravery in which to walk through, because I wish it was so much more accessible to us and so much more normalized and infused throughout our culture and throughout our relationships. But it's not. So it does require work, and it requires, like, even like when someone walks into like a workshop that I'm teaching, or if they're speaking, going to my talk when they have 10 other to choose from, there is bravery in saying, I would like to hear someone who's talking about sexuality. I wonder who else is here. There's a lot to claim it. It's not just me claiming it. It's also those saying, I'm interested. I could choose something else, but I've chosen you, instead of just accidentally like falling into this room. And I think even just that skill, that you have to work even just a little bit, even if it's just a 5 pound weight, as a metaphor, makes a difference that infuses to other areas. And making a choice to examine who you are as a sexual being ends up becoming the example of why you should, because it will change you. And when I think about the question, when my acting coach looked at me and said, fix that shit, fix whatever this is, like, fix it. I love that I now, 20 some years later, can say, I'm not sure I would say fix is the word, but I would say I'm still looking at it. And I love, I mean, I think that's another reason why it's the final frontier, is that, so, like, sexuality is fluid. There's fluidity within it, and that word can be used differently. But really, what I mean is it interacts with your timeline, it interacts with your lifespan, and it interacts with your self knowledge. So it's never a one question. What I'm quote fixing, although I don't use that word the same now. It's I love that it changes, because
Yeah.
I'm knowing different parts of me.
That's, again, to draw the parallel to pretty much any, deep interpersonal work. It's not like I figured out the answer and that's it. It's now engraved in stone for the rest of this lifetime. Like, who we are as individuals is always changing, and what we might want or need in the realm of sexuality will change as we end up in different relationships, as we get older, as our bodies change, things like that. So yeah, that's an important point to make, that it is an ongoing process. But so is personal development. It doesn't ever actually end, which sometimes for some people is like, fuck.
I know.
Right. But you've got to reframe that, and you got to just realize that that's what this life is actually about. It is about the journey. It is about the process of learning and becoming the best version of ourselves. And that doesn't end. That doesn't ever end. And so you just have to embrace that, as that's what it's all about. You can make it hard, but it doesn't have to be. You can also make it more fun and easy. Doesn't mean it'll always be fun and easy. Sometimes there are really challenging moments, but it doesn't have to always be that way. So I suggest that you have a little mental reframe on that.
Agreed. And I love it too, like when, and because sometimes it doesn't happen this way and it just comes for you. Like if something hard happens within this context, then you really don't have a choice but to examine it. It just, the choice becomes how deeply do you examine it. But I love it when people get ahead of it themselves, that they approach the topic and they begin a relationship with their own sexuality on their own terms and in their own timing. That's really the my favorite way, but that's not how life does it. And I don't know if you live, if you live a certain amount of time, it's sexuality is going to just come knocking on your door, and who's going to be the person that answers?
Ooh, there's a question. Who's going to answer that door? I mean, yeah, it will. The question is, do you answer it or do you just keep hiding behind the door, right? Which is something that a lot of people will do as
Yeah.
well.
Hmm. True.
Okay, I need to take a short break. And when we come back, I want to talk at least a little bit about the 9 pillars of holistic sexuality because we've kind of, I threw out, oh, if you want to know what the possibilities are, go listen to my podcast. Okay, great. Thanks, Kevin, for promoting your podcast. But but I think what will make this even more clear is if we start talking about the different areas of holistic sexuality that might, get people to understand, oh, I could look at this aspect or that aspect. So we won't have time to cover all 9 of them, but at least we can mention what they are. We can dive into a couple of them. And I think that will help people understand more how to go about this journey. But first, are you a couple? Are your relationship and sex life where you want them to be? Are there changes you would like to make, but just don't know how? Maybe you think there's nothing that can be done. If you're not 100% happy with where your relationship and sex life is, then get help today and change your life. Go to kevinanthonycoaching.com/couples and schedule a strategy call with me today so we can map out a strategy to get you where you want to be so you can have it all your way. That is kevinanthonycoaching.com/couples. Book your strategy call today. And of course, at the end, I will give Juliana an opportunity to share where you can find out about her work and her books and all the ways that she is also trying to help as many people as she can. Okay, let's talk about the 9 pillars of holistic sexuality. Uh, First, I'll just, and I hope I wrote them down correctly. You can correct me if I did not, but I wrote them down. So rather than asking you to remember all 9 off the top of your head, let me just read them and then let's just pick a couple and talk about them. So obviously, we're using the term holistic sexuality. Holistic means encompassing the whole of something, not just isolating things. We know that generally when we tend to isolate things and try to view them in a vacuum, that they don't always work the same way that they do in the whole, right? Perfect example of that is let's isolate a nutrient all by itself and then, oh, it either has an effect or it doesn't have an effect. But then we put it back in the whole of everything and suddenly it does something completely different, right? So we want to look at sexuality holistically, not just picking out individual pieces and isolating them. So you have what you call the 9 pillars of holistic sexuality. They are sensuality, wellness/fertility, desire, pleasure, intersecting identities, power and trauma, sex acts, connection, and relationships. Did I get those right?
You did, yes.
Okay, good.
And
So,
agency is the hub of all of those. Like it's
yes,
inter. Yeah.
which we will definitely talk about also. Um, let's just pick a couple out of here that maybe seem less obvious to people. Uh, I don't know. I think wellness and fertility maybe is pretty obvious. Like your physical body has to function.
Right.
So if you're having challenges with that, most people would go, oh, yeah, my whatever's not working. Let me go to the doctor. Okay. That one's pretty obvious. Um, how about power and trauma? Let's talk about that a little bit. What does that really mean?
Mhm. It's so power is inherent in any relationship, and sexuality is no different. A power within yourself, or if you're doing it with other people, interacting sexually with other people, then power is going to be a dynamic that you need to acknowledge and explore. And there's a lot of things within power that we can look at, but in essence, what we're looking at in holistic sexuality is how does power intersect? How does it inform the relationship? And in what ways do you interact with it? And that is anything from the a lot of things within sexual violence to flirting and seduction. And it's really interesting because when I first started doing this work, I thought like I'm going to be like the tears are going to come when we're really talking about like the obvious awful things of sexual violence. And what was surprising to me was actually when I started asking questions about flirting and seduction, that's actually where I saw a lot more tears and a lot more shame and confusion. Our culture is doing a better job about speaking about sexual violence, not preventing it, but speaking about it. But when are we asked, like, well, Kevin, who are you as a flirting person, and how do you flirt, or how do you know when someone's flirting with you? And a lot of times people will say, "Oh, that's not me," or they say, "Yes, I am," but they're not sure how to make it in a detail, and they're not really sure how to describe who they think they are with it, or what it means to seduce versus what it means to flirt, and how have you experienced those things yourself, or doing how someone else experiences you. So it's interacting with the power of your sexuality and the dynamic of sexuality in and of itself.
Yeah, and that is an area that I think a lot of people, maybe it's one of the, if they get there, it's one of the later ones that they probably address, is that idea of power. This is one of those areas, depending on how it's used, this is one of those areas that I think BDSM can do a good job of helping people understand. I'm not saying you have to go out and get really into BDSM if it's not your thing at all, but what they do a good job of there when it's done right is playing
Mhm.
with those power dynamics and helping people understand what they are and giving them language and tools to be able to navigate power dynamics in a safe way. But that's more of an
Yes.
advanced skill.
It is. It is. I agree with you. And all your caveats of like when it's done right and, all of those, I say the same things. And also, I want it to be an entry point for everyone. I want everyone to have it. There's different levels. Like earlier when you're like, well, that's more the advanced. I agree. There are some things that have levels to it, but everyone experiences some kind of power differential with it, and you can either choose to be proactive in that or reactive, and I prefer proactive across the board. And I agree, in that world, when it's done right, I have found it to be incredibly healing, and I even recommend it for people who've experienced trauma. That it's with parameters there can be a lot of healing that is done. And it's controversial. Some people think people are interested because of trauma and healing, and of course, there's always that element. But I have actually seen the that in that world, because consent and proactive communication, when it's done right, is such an integral part of it, that alone gives someone agency, and they get to have a different relationship with either just choosing to submit or choosing to dom. And that being able to have agency can't change what's happened to you, but it can change your way of making meaning of it now, in your trust of yourself and your trust with other people. And I have a personal experience with shibari, which is the art of rope tying or silks, and was in a group, a large group of women only, and when someone came to speak and to do a demonstration of shibari, a group of women got up and left. And I knew in that group that those women had experienced sexual violence, and one of them knew that I had as well, and came over to me and said, "Are you going to leave?" I was like, "No, no, 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 no. I'm going to stay. I want to always. I'm always somebody who wants to at least do something once and try something once and just to see." And I was not afraid of that experience, and no harm to those who knew that they needed to leave. But I ended up volunteering to be the person that the expert tied, and the experience of choosing to allow myself to not be in control and to not have the power felt quite powerful. And And even with somebody who I didn't know at all, and we had to build trust very quickly, and had to go through, some of that. I had to just trust the trust, and that I couldn't believe how great it felt, how exciting it felt, and how I felt differently afterwards. Um, and and that's when it really wasn't in the best of circumstances ideal. It wasn't ideal in the way that it went about. When I've experienced it, when it is more ideal, it's even tenfold that it's not for everybody. That's not everyone's story, and it's not right for everybody. But that's why power and trauma is one of the last pillars that I introduce to people, because there's a complexity to it that you have to know how to go through other ones first. Not the other ones are more simple, they're not, but the latter ones are the order is on purpose. And power and trauma has layers that you can miss if you do it too soon. And it's also a reason why I ask people to go through it multiple times, so that you get it, and then you can really get it.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I said it's more of an advanced skill. There's definitely other things that you would want to tap into prior to getting there, but it does have a definite possibility of being very healing and profound for some people. And much like you, like I have a different client right now who that's one of the things, and not BDSM specifically, but she had a complicated past with sexuality growing up and all of that stuff. And so one of the things that I said to her was, okay, what we need to do is get you into an environment where you can experiment safely, right?
Mm-hmm.
With boundaries and trusted people and resources, right? And so that's something that we're working on. She's in another country, so I'm in the process of trying to find a facilitator that I really trust recommending to her in her home country. But I was happy to hear you say that that's something that you will often do with clients as well when they get to that point where they're ready for it, because I do think it has potential to really help people. Let's just pick one or two others here. Let me say this. Are there any others in here that you think it's really important that we should talk about?
Yeah, I love talking about sensuality. It's the first pillar, and it's not, again, it's not because it's the most simple, or the easiest. And I originally thought that, which is why I put it first, and then I saw how much was there for people, and saw that it actually was really difficult. But I put it first because everyone just like everyone that has sexuality, everyone has sensuality, and they may not know what we're talking about, and so it's not everyone has all five senses, but everyone has access to some level of senses. And if you do have access to all five, then you have a variability within that. And so it's a common ground where we can begin. But yeah, there is so much richness to unfold in it. And people often misunderstand sensuality and sexuality, that they think it's the same thing, and it's not. Or they have a view of a sensual person is the right kind of sexual person. And the sensual person has there's often like a stereotype attached to what that sensual person looks like, sounds like, and talks. And when you discover, especially if you don't look like the stereotype of that or seem like that, when you discover, no, you are a sensual being inherently too, then I have seen it be incredibly powerful. It is also a place that is rich with the ability to enact your agency. Lots of places where you get to say yum or yuck and yes or no to it, that don't require a huge amount of risk taking, but do give a lot of information back. So it becomes foundational for the other pillars in which to ask yourself the yes or no. When you've practiced it on all five senses, when you've explored that, you have really done a deep dive that springboards you into the other ones.
When you were talking about the idea that people have of what they think someone who's sensual is like, I got this image in my head. I was looking for this for years because I had seen it many years ago, and then I couldn't find it for a lot of years. And I finally, about a year ago, I found it again, and I posted it on social media. It's a clip from a comedy show. I don't even remember the name of the comedy show. It was a sketch comedy show, and it was this guy, and he's basically talking about his path through tantra, and that he's so like in touch now that he keeps having like orgasms nonstop throughout the entire time he's talking, and it is hilarious. It's not too far buried in my Instagram if anybody wants to find it, but it is absolutely hilarious. And I think sometimes that's the idea that people have in their minds, right? Of somebody who's sensual. They're like, oh, everything, oh,
Right.
kind of thing.
Yes, exactly. My view is that she had long, flowy hair and she wore skirts and didn't wear shoes. And she just talked like this. And she was just really, and she smelled delicious. And that is beautiful and fabulous and not me. And not a lot of people, but yet we all are equally sensual. And again, the confusion of sexuality and sensuality is important to clear up. And I like getting at that first too. And it's so exciting to me when somebody starts reticent to get into sensuality and they're like, oh my God, like, okay, Juliana, like, yes or no, yes or no, it's a yes. And then they're like, I want to tell you, this is such a yes for me, or this is absolutely a no. And the confidence and the excitement they have for self discovery becomes contagious. I have an example. Is it okay to give an example?
Yeah, of course.
Um, I had this one couple that came to me, and they gave me permission to share, and they were about to break up, which is oftentimes what I'm getting. And their reason was that they really felt sexually incompatible. And his viewpoint was that she wasn't sensual enough and that the kind of sex that she liked to have was not interesting to him. And he really positioned it as wrong. And she came and said, I feel very vanilla and I really don't find excitement and I can't get turned on with the things that he's wanting. And basically she's like, I'm a dead fish. I am not sensual at all. And I knew I don't often do this, but I knew that I needed to do some work with her separately to figure out if this was accurate or if this was just the story that was being told. And I had her go through this list as we went through this book. The book that I have is based on a course, and I had her go through the course. And when we got to the list of sex acts and she was going through them, she was the least, I don't love the word vanilla anyway, I don't love putting values to it, but the woman had experienced a lot of things and she had done a lot of sex acts. And I remember sitting there going like, why did you describe yourself as this earlier? Like your list is much bigger and wider and you have a lot more experimenting than I've heard from a lot of people. This is fabulous. Like why do you have this mismatch? And it was because she was positioning herself from her partner's point of view. And so we got into the sensuality. And by the way, she wouldn't do sensuality first. She's my only person that said, I'm not starting here. And I,
That's the what.
yes, it is the one. Right. And so I knew that. So we came back to it and she grieved a lot about it and just kept saying she was afraid to find out that she wasn't sensual. She was afraid to find out that he was right. And we weren't having a lot of nuggets come up. We weren't finding a lot of things until we got to touch. And I had her do an exercise about finding what different textures she liked on her skin. And she came back and realized that she loved the feeling of like simulated like sheep wool on her. And I was like, great. Like, and she's like, is it though? I mean, I don't know if it's so great. I was like, no, we found a yes. Like, this is beautiful. And when she came back the next week, she came back and she's like, you're not going to believe this. It's everywhere. I have a rug. I have it in my car. Like the back of my car, I had bought one special. And she's like, I actually have a vest that is sheeple. And she's like, I did know it. I knew it all along. And and it just, the light bulb clicked on for her. She's like, I am a sensual person. And it was this cascading effect of I'm valid. I am valid. The way that I show up in the world as a sexual person, as a sensual person, is good and right, and it just isn't aligned with this partner. And that doesn't. We don't have to make him right or wrong, and I don't have to be right or wrong in this. But her discovering it on her own and finding her yeses and nos with that kind of confidence, changed everything. And the relationship did end, and it needed to for a lot of reasons. But who she was and how she talked about herself moving forward was absolutely different. And it would not have come up had it not been for examining who she was in her senses.
Yeah, we don't have time to go into it, but this idea that the relationship ultimately ended and it should have is definitely something that comes up from time to time, and that I talk about. It's like, you're generally coming to me because you want to save the relationship, whatever is happening, whether it's relationship stuff or sex stuff or both. But not every relationship should be safe. I do my best, but every once in a while, and it doesn't happen very often, every once in a while, we get to a place where we go, you both actually would be better off
Yeah.
with a
Yeah.
more compatible partner.
Everyone's going to be happier and be okay.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, we're pretty much out of time, but we have to at least talk about one last thing because we've kind of talked about it here and there, but we haven't really gotten to it. And that's this idea of agency. You've brought the word up a few times, you've mixed it in with some of your explanations. Can we just talk a little bit about, how does agency factor into these pillars?
Yeah. So agency, in the shortest definition, is learning your terms and learning how to live your terms. So what are your yeses and nos? Which means that you have to know yourself. You have to do the work to authentically answer. Is this a yes or a no? Is this a yuck or a yum? And then learning to have the skills to enact your agency, like to enact your terms, to have relationships that support that want to hear your yeses and nos and have their own yeses and nos, and that you realize that knowing who you are and knowing your terms and living them is not just your right, it's your responsibility. Because when people are acting in the knowledge of the truth of who they are and making decisions with purpose and intention based on the truth of who they are, they make decisions that are aligned, that have a ripple effect of positivity for themselves and the people in their life. And when more people act in agency, then we see communities and families and cultures and countries behaving in a way that is supportive of humanity, instead of it being something that is destroying that. And that may sound like a strong statement, but it is an absolute truth. And I see the difference of somebody who has done the work to be able to say, this is my yes and this is my no, and as a person who receives the yes or no, and be- separately from somebody who is only individually focused, either in an entitled or an empowered way, and is able to be relational. The difference of that is, I mean, it's palpable.
So basically, getting to know who you are as a sexual being then allows you to operate with agency.
Yep. Yeah. It does, because if you have the, and I've used this word a lot, but if you have the bravery to say an authentic yes or no and who you are as a sexual being, it's exactly how you described who you were at that party, which is you feel safe. And I think ultimately agency is an act of self-trust. And when you trust yourself, then you get to interact in the world differently. When you don't trust yourself and you don't trust the world, there's a synergy to that distrust that makes you show up differently in any situation. And you become either someone who is afraid of a lot of things, which doesn't feel like living and doesn't feel vital, or you are somebody that people become afraid of because you act in ways that are dangerous to other people because you're not considering other people because you don't know how
Yeah.
to consider yourself.
Well, I knew asking you that question about agency was going to open up a whole bunch more questions, which we don't really have time for, but I have to ask one more in relation to this idea of agency. So you're talking about people asking themselves, am I a yes to this? Am I a no to this? I would like to add one thing to that and then get your take on what I say, which is basically it's one thing to ask yourself, are you a yes or are you a no? But the next level below that is, why are you a yes or are you a no? Because if you ask yourself, I'm a no to this, am I a yes or a no to this act? You go, I'm an absolute no. Okay. Maybe you're no because that's just not in line with your values. Great. but maybe you're a no because there's an underlying trauma that could be healed. And if you had healed that, it's like the women who got up and left, they were a no to Shibari, but they were a no to Shibari because there was an underlying trauma. And so, I just kind of wanted to bring that idea up that it's not just as simple as asking yourself, am I a yes or a no? It's helpful to get to the bottom of why you are a yes or a no to certain things. What do you think about that?
It's an absolute yes for me. I agree. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with that. And I think it's the next round that you do. And it's, to me, it's also why agency is so powerful. And how you just described it is even the difference between being empowered and being an agency, which is you go to the next layer of it. And I agree. I think there's a lot of things that you can find when you say, the way that I ask is, let's explore how you got to that yes or no, and where is the beginning point of that, or where do you have those curves in it. And I will always say, when I'm asking somebody their yes or the no, I will say, let's write it in sand and not in cement, because there could be a time, it could be tomorrow, it could be in 3 years, that it becomes a yes, or the yes becomes a no. And so I want you to have an answer with purpose and intention. And I also don't want you to hold so firm to it, because you never know what could happen when you ask yourself it a second time or a fifth time, which is different than second guessing. When you ask the why, or the tell me more aspect of it, then I think you really get into the depth of the self-development part of sexuality.
Yes. Well, Dr. Juliana, I want to just say that I'm grateful that there are people like yourself out there who are helping people figure this out, because it is so important. And if we want to come back full circle and talk about how once we figure this complicated piece out that has so much dogma and just misinformation and negative energy around it, when we can actually sort that out and get to a healthy place, almost everything else in our life is at least some percentage better than it was before. So it's just so important that people do the work, and that they have people like yourself to help them do the work.
I feel the same way for you too. I appreciate your work, what you're doing too. It makes a difference, and we know it's not easy for you and I to be in these spaces. It feels worse to not be, because once you get it, and once it's changed your life, it's really hard to not want to share that, and to say this isn't the only way that we can experience this. And so I'm grateful for you too.
Well, thank you. All right. Before we get off, please tell people how they can find you, and what your website is, anything that you want to offer them.
Great. So I'm Dr. Juliana Hauser on all social media platforms. My website is Dr. Juliana, and I have a newsletter that I do different content in the newsletter than I do on social media. And so I love it when I get to interact with people in my newsletter. And then my book comes out in the end of September, September 23rd, and it's on all online platforms. And I love it when people write me and tell me what they think about it. And there's a part of the book that I'm really curious how it's gonna go. At the end of the chapters, I have a QR code that it takes you to a part of my website where I have more people sharing stories about each of the pillars, and they're in audio form and they're in written form, and more information about each of it that had to be cut because the book can't be 500 pages. I'm really hoping people will go there, and there's places to submit your own stories, and to submit your questions. And I'm really looking forward to that growing.
Awesome. Well, I wish you great success with that. I think, again, what you're doing is awesome. And I want to thank you for coming on the show and sharing it today.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin.
All right, everybody, that's all the time I have for this episode, and I will see you next week. I hope you liked this episode of the Love Lab podcast. If you enjoy this show, subscribe, leave me a review, and share it with your friends. And for more free exclusive content, join me in the Passion Vault at kevinanthonycoaching.com/vault. That's kevinanthonycoaching.com/vault. Thanks for listening. And remember, as Celine used to say, you're amazing.